I know I'm just an old guy spinning tales, but some tales aren't meant to be ignored. Trust me, you'll want to hear this one. So turn down the lights, settle in, and let's dive into today's chilling stories. Before we begin, a fair warning. What you're about to hear is purely for entertainment. These stories and theories, they're nothing more than shadows in the dark. No proof, just whispers carried by the night. Listen closely, but don't say, "I didn't warn you." Viewer discretion is strongly advised. In the fall of 1965, Los Angeles faced one of its strangest and most destructive wildfires. The locals called it the Red Ridge Fire. The fire wasn't particularly large at first, but it grew rapidly, spreading faster than anything firefighters had ever seen. What baffled everyone was how it behaved, moving against the wind, leaping over fire breaks, and burning in random, erratic patterns. Even stranger were the stories that emerged from survivors who had narrowly escaped. People living in Red Ridge Canyon reported hearing strange, disembodied voices in the smoke as the fire closed in on their homes. Some claimed they heard their names being whispered, as if the fire itself was calling to them. "I swear I heard my mother's voice," one survivor recalled. "She passed away years ago, but I heard her clear as day, calling my name. It was wrong, though. Her voice sounded twisted, like it wasn't really her." Several families who tried to flee the fire vanished without a trace. Their bodies were never found, and their homes were reduced to ash. But the strangest case of all was a lone house in the middle of the canyon that remained completely untouched by the fire. Firefighters, baffled by the phenomenon, entered the house after the blaze had passed. Inside, everything was perfectly preserved, as if nothing had happened. On the dining table, they found an old leather-bound journal belonging to the previous owner, a man named Jacob Hale, who had lived in the house until his mysterious disappearance during a smaller wildfire in 1942. The final entry in the journal sent chills down the spines of those who read it. "The fire isn't what they think. It isn't natural. I've seen the shadows walking in the flames, heard the whispers calling my name. It's not here to burn. It's here to take. If you hear the voices, don't listen. If you see the shadows, don't look. The fire always comes back." The journal was never made public. The firefighters who found it were sworn to secrecy by local authorities, who didn't want to incite panic. Officially, the Red Ridge Fire was blamed on high winds and dry conditions. But those who lived in the area knew better. For years after the fire, strange things continued to happen. Late at night, people claimed to see flickering lights in the hills, small, glowing orbs that would float silently before vanishing. Some said they heard faint whispers on the wind when they walked near the old fire zone. And more than once, hikers who ventured too far into the canyon reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something unseen was watching them. By the early 1970s, most of the remaining residents had moved away. Red Ridge Canyon became a ghost town, its once thriving community reduced to a handful of empty houses and charred ruins. But the fire wasn't forgotten. Locals whispered that the Red Ridge Fire wasn't really gone. It was only waiting for the right time to return. Exactly 60 years after the infamous Red Ridge Fire, the canyon was once again a hot spot for strange activity. Most people had long forgotten the eerie stories surrounding the old blaze, but a few curious hikers and urban explorers still ventured into the abandoned canyon, sharing photos of burned ruins and untouched remnants of the past. One evening in late summer 2025, reports of a new wildfire in Red Ridge Canyon began pouring in. At first, it seemed like any other wildfire: dry weather, high winds, and an inevitable spark. But something about this fire felt wrong. Within hours, the fire grew out of control. Despite the lack of wind, it spread rapidly in all directions, ignoring fire breaks and moving toward populated areas. "It's like it's alive," one firefighter reported over the radio. "It's not following the wind. It's coming straight for us." Locals living on the outskirts of the canyon reported strange phenomena as the fire approached. One family claimed they heard faint voices in the distance, carried on the smoky wind. At first, they thought it was firefighters calling out to each other. But as the voices grew clearer, they realized the voices were calling their names. "I heard my brother's voice," one man said, visibly shaken. "He died years ago, but I swear it was him. He was calling to me from the smoke, telling me to come outside." The family locked their doors and windows, terrified by what they were hearing. But their dog, frantic from the strange sounds, broke free and ran toward the fire. Moments later, the dog's barking stopped, and when they looked outside, there was no sign of it, just the growing wall of flames. Despite the efforts of hundreds of firefighters and aerial crews, the fire continued to spread uncontrollably. Planes dropping fire retardant had little effect, and water seemed to evaporate before reaching the flames. Even stranger, firefighters on the front lines reported seeing shadows moving within the smoke. "At first, I thought it was just the heat playing tricks on my eyes," one firefighter recounted. "But the shadows weren't random. They were shaped like people. They were walking, watching us." That night, a firefighter named Alex went missing during a routine sweep of the perimeter. His last radio transmission sent chills through the entire crew. "They're here, in the fire. Don't let them in." The line went dead, and despite an exhaustive search, Alex was never found. No trace of his body, no sign of where he might have gone, just his helmet lying in the middle of a scorched clearing. The following morning, news of the fire dominated every headline. "Unstoppable fire rages through Los Angeles Canyon," read one. But the people closest to the blaze knew it was more than just a wildfire. "This isn't a fire," an old man told a reporter, his voice trembling. "It's the same thing that came in '65. It's back, and it's hungry." As the fire continued to spread, a group of researchers decided to investigate the area where the fire had first ignited. They hoped to find some clue, maybe an electrical spark, or evidence of an accidental campfire. But what they found was far more chilling. In the middle of the burned forest stood the same lone house that had survived the fire in 1965. Despite the raging inferno surrounding it, the house remained untouched, its walls unscathed, its windows perfectly intact. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been 6 decades ago. Dust covered the furniture, but nothing was burned or even disturbed. On the dining table, the journal from 1965 still lay open, as if someone had just been reading it. There was a new entry. "It's awake again. The fire never really dies. It waits, buried beneath the ash, feeding on fear. It grows stronger every time someone listens to the whispers. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Don't listen to them. Don't let them in." The researchers, unnerved by the discovery, quickly left the house. But when they returned to their vehicles, they noticed something strange. The wind had stopped entirely, yet the air felt heavy, suffocating. Then faintly, at first, they heard it, the sound of whispers carried on the smoke. The researchers drove away in a panic, but one of them, a young woman named Maya, couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. Later that night, she woke up in a cold sweat, hearing her name being whispered from outside her window. She didn't dare look outside. The next morning, Maya was gone. Her door was locked from the inside, her car still parked outside, but there was no sign of her. On her bed, the words, "Don't listen to them," were scrawled in ash. The disappearance of Maya sent shockwaves through the research team. They tried to report what had happened to local authorities, but their claims were dismissed as hysteria, brought on by stress and exhaustion. No one wanted to hear stories about whispers in the smoke, or a fire that doesn't behave naturally. As far as the public was concerned, it was just another devastating wildfire. But Maya's disappearance wasn't the only strange occurrence. Firefighters battling the blaze began to report increasingly bizarre experiences. Several claimed they saw shadowy figures moving inside the fire, unaffected by the heat. At first, they dismissed it as smoke, playing tricks on their eyes, but the sightings became more frequent. "It's not normal," one firefighter said during a private briefing. "I saw someone standing in the middle of the fire. I called out thinking it was a civilian trapped, but they didn't move. They just stood there, watching me, and then they were gone." Another firefighter, visibly shaken, described hearing a child's voice calling for help deep in the burning forest. Despite the intense flames, he ventured closer, only to find nothing but scorched earth. It was like the fire was luring me in. Several crews requested to be reassigned, unwilling to face the fire again. Those who stayed behind did so with a growing sense of dread. They didn't just fear the flames. They feared what might be hiding within them. One night, as the fire raged across a new section of the canyon, a group of firefighters lost contact with the command center. Radio transmissions crackled with static, punctuated by strange, garbled voices. Then, through the interference, a clear message came through. "It's not a fire. It's alive. Don't listen to the whispers. They're trying to pull us in." The transmission ended abruptly. A search team was dispatched immediately, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of the missing crew. Their fire truck was found parked on the side of a dirt road, its doors wide open, and the surrounding area scorched black. No bodies were ever recovered. Desperate for answers, the remaining researchers revisited the lone house that had survived both wildfires. This time, they brought specialized equipment designed to detect electromagnetic fields and other anomalies. As soon as they entered the house, their instruments went haywire, registering strange, fluctuating energy levels. "It's like the house exists in two places at once," one researcher whispered, staring at the erratic readings. "There's something wrong with this place." While examining the journal again, they noticed something they had missed before, a series of symbols scrawled on the back cover. The symbols didn't match any known language, but they resembled ancient runes. One of the researchers, who had a background in folklore, recognized them immediately. "These are protection symbols," she said, her voice trembling. "People used to carve them into their homes to ward off evil spirits. Whoever lived here knew something was coming." Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. The air grew thick, making it difficult to breathe. Then faintly at first, they heard the whispers, soft, insistent, and growing louder. "We need to leave," one of them said, panic rising in their voice. But before they could move, the front door slammed shut on its own, and the windows fogged over with ash. The whispers became deafening, filling their minds with images of fire and shadows. Just as they thought they wouldn't make it out, one of the researchers managed to activate a counter-frequency device they had brought with them, a prototype designed to disrupt electromagnetic anomalies. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, and within seconds, the whispers stopped. The air cleared, and the temperature returned to normal. They didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing the journal and their equipment, they fled the house. Back at their temporary headquarters, the researchers analyzed the data they had collected. What they found sent chills down their spines. There were distinct energy spikes occurring every time the fire spread to a new area. The pattern was too precise to be natural. This fire isn't just feeding on dry brush and wind, one researcher concluded. It's feeding on fear. The more afraid people become, the stronger it gets. Rachel, who had been leading the investigation, felt a sinking sense of dread. So, it's not just a wildfire, it's something sentient, something that thrives on fear and destruction. Her colleague nodded grimly. And if we don't find a way to stop it, it won't stop until there's nothing left. The wildfire showed no signs of slowing. Despite every effort from emergency responders, it continued to spread, burning through areas that had already been doused in fire retardant. To the public, it was a disaster, another uncontrollable blaze. But Rachel and her team now knew the truth. This wasn't an ordinary fire. It was something far worse, something feeding on fear, growing stronger with each passing hour. They needed answers. Fast. The key, they believed, lay in the strange journal they had retrieved from the untouched house. Late that night, Rachel and the remaining researchers gathered in a secure location to study it further. Carefully flipping through the fragile pages of the journal, Rachel noticed something odd. Several entries didn't seem to fit the flow of the narrative. They were short, cryptic notes, written in a different ink, almost as if someone had added them long after the journal had been completed. One of the notes read, "The fire was never meant to be seen. It's a gateway, and they are the ones who come through." "What do they mean by gateway?" Rachel muttered, her fingers tracing the faded letters. Another note followed. "They come from the other side. The fire is how they open the door. When fear spreads, so does their reach." Rachel's colleague Elena leaned closer, her expression grim. "It sounds like this fire isn't just feeding on fear. It's creating a doorway to something else." Rachel nodded, trying to stay calm. "A doorway to where?" Before Elena could answer, the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, followed by a low, distant rumble. "It's spreading again," one of the researchers said, checking the latest reports on a nearby monitor. "It's moving faster than before." Rachel felt her heart sink. They didn't have much time. "We need to stop it before it fully opens this gateway," Elena said, pacing nervously. "If it completes whatever process it's going through, we might not be able to contain it." "But how do we stop something that isn't really a fire?" Rachel asked. Elena hesitated before answering. The counter-frequency device worked inside the house. It disrupted whatever energy was creating the whispers. If we can amplify it, and place it at the heart of the fire, it might be enough to sever its connection to wherever it's drawing its power from. Rachel stared at her, stunned. You're talking about walking straight into the fire. You know what's in there. The shadows, the whispers. We barely made it out last time. I know, Elena said quietly, but it's our only chance. The next morning, Rachel, Elena, and 2 firefighters volunteered to enter the active fire zone. Equipped with the modified counter-frequency device, they knew they were heading straight into danger, but they had no other choice. The fire loomed ahead of them like a living, breathing monster. Thick smoke filled the air, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. As they moved deeper into the blaze, the whispers began. Don't listen, Elena warned. They're trying to confuse us. Rachel tried to focus on the path ahead, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. She could hear her father's voice, calling her name, begging for help. She knew it wasn't real, but it felt so familiar, so right. Suddenly, one of the firefighters froze. Did you hear that? My son. He's out there. Stay with us, Rachel shouted, grabbing his arm. It's not real. Keep moving. Reluctantly, the firefighter followed, his eyes wide with fear. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the air itself was vibrating with sound. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing where the fire burned brightest. In the center of the inferno stood a tall, blackened monolith, pulsing with an unnatural energy. Shadows flickered around it, their forms shifting and melting into the flames. That's it, Elena whispered. That's the source. Quickly, they set up the counter-frequency device. The shadows seemed to sense what they were doing, moving closer, their whispers turning into guttural growls. Hurry! Rachel urged as Elena calibrated the device. The ground trembled violently as the monolith began to pulse faster, as if reacting to the threat. The shadows closed in, circling the group, their forms growing more solid. It's ready! Elena shouted, hitting the activation switch. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, followed by a deep, resonating hum. The air around them shimmered as the frequency disrupted the energy field surrounding the monolith. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the monolith cracked, emitting a blinding light. The shadows let out an ear-piercing screech as they dissolved into the flames. The fire around them began to waver, shrinking back as if losing its strength. It's working! Rachel shouted over the noise. Suddenly, the monolith shattered completely, and with it, the fire began to die down. The whispers stopped, the shadows vanished, and the oppressive heat dissipated. They had done it. By the time they returned to the command center, the wildfire had been fully contained. Firefighters reported that the flames had simply given up, as if whatever force had been driving them was gone. The media declared it a miraculous turnaround, but Rachel and her team knew the truth. They had stopped something far worse than a simple wildfire. However, as they packed up their equipment, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. She glanced back at the charred remains of Red Ridge Canyon, half expecting to see shadows flickering in the distance. For now, the fire was gone. But deep down, Rachel knew one thing. It would be back. The fire had been extinguished, and life in Los Angeles slowly began to return to normal. News outlets praised the heroic efforts of the firefighters and scientists who had seemingly performed the impossible, containing one of the most dangerous wildfires the region had ever seen. But for Rachel and her team, it wasn't a time to celebrate. They knew that what they had stopped wasn't a natural fire. It was something ancient, something that didn't belong in their world. They had severed its connection, but there was no guarantee it was gone for good. A few days after the fire was contained, Rachel received a call from Elena. "You need to come to the lab," Elena said, her voice tense. "We found something." When Rachel arrived, Elena showed her a page from the journal they had retrieved from the untouched house. The page had been blank when they first examined it, but now faint writing had appeared, as if it had been burned into the paper by an unseen hand. It read, "You stopped it this time, but it will return. It always returns. When fear grows again, so will the fire. You can't destroy what doesn't live." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "So, it's only a matter of time?" Elena nodded. "That's what it sounds like. Whatever this thing is, it feeds on fear. The more fear spreads, the stronger it becomes. And the next time it returns, it might not be something we can stop." In the weeks following the wildfire, strange reports began to surface in nearby areas. People claimed to see flickering lights in the hills at night, small glowing orbs that seemed to hover before disappearing. Others reported hearing faint whispers in the wind, calling their names. One camper described seeing a figure standing in the distance, completely still, watching him from the edge of the forest. When he approached, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind a faint smell of smoke. As these stories spread, fear began to grow once more. One night, Rachel sat alone in her apartment, unable to sleep. The journal's warning played over and over in her mind. When fear grows again, so will the fire. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You can't stop it. It's already awake." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She quickly tried calling the number, but there was no answer. When she checked the message again, it had disappeared. She glanced out her window at the dark city below. For a moment, everything was still. Too still. Then faintly, she saw it, far in the distance, on the edge of the hills, a small flickering light. It looked like the glow of a fire, but it didn't spread. It just hovered there, watching. Rachel turned away, pulling the curtains shut, because deep down, she knew the truth. The fire wasn't gone. It was waiting. And when it came back, it wouldn't just burn the hills. It would burn everything.